Welcome home. This is the Irish Roots Cafe, where every day's a holiday, and there's always room for one more. Come right this way, have a seat with me today in the corner booth, celebrating episode number 132. Sweeney clear that floor. Katie bar the door, Molly put on another pot of Irish coffee, and it's time to bring out those Irish dancers. It's time we get this show on the road. We've got another full house today, not a chair to spare. Hey, I'm Mike OLaughlin, your host. You can reach me on my webpage at irishroots.com, and be sure to check out the written show notes on my blog. That's on the webpage. Just click on the left-hand side there where it says Mike's Blog, and it'll give you that blog, and you can just click on places that I'm talking about in this podcast and go right to it. That way I don't have to read off all those long lists of addresses there. And you can also search all of our books and the blog on the webpage, so it'll be good. And you can also phone 816-256-3360 and leave your comments or recommendations or even your family search on my recorder. Try it, you'll like it. Among today's topics, O'Guin is the family name of the day. Viking wall on display. Miss Ireland keeps her job and she gets dissed. How much tax is right on a pint in Ireland? Swine flu in Northern Ireland. And who was it caught by there? Australia Online and the Irish Family Project, too. And look, no wigs on these Irish dancers. Now it's time to move on to this week's topics. Well, let's take a look at our notes this week. What's happening here at the cafe? And I tell you, busy, busier than a fiddler's elbow, as Fitzgerald always said. And, hey, the Irish Families Project, that's my 34-book set of Irish family history notes by county. That's now stocked in Australia. I don't know how long it'll last. Some of those counties are going to go real quick, I bet. But Gould Genealogy, G-O-U-L-D, Gould Genealogy are the ones that have them, so be sure to give them a look up if you're looking for those books in Australia. They might get there a little quicker. And, you know, that includes the whole line of those county books. Every single county's included, so if you talk with them, tell them OLaughlin said hello. Number 2, Peter Riley Adams. He's been a frequent guest, and he's now a co-host on the Irish Hedgerow History Session podcast, and he announced that he's also taking 2 groups to Ireland next year, and one is in March and one might be in May, but if you're interested, let me know. I'll let him know, and he can contact you direct. That's his own thing right now. Number 3, it seems that Molly wants to go on tour next year all across the country with us, just like we've been doing at the Dublin Irish Festival for 11 years now. She says it's time to do some more exhibits and some talks and lectures and consultations. So if you'd like to hire us for your Irish Fest or special event for next year, let us know so we can get it on the schedule now and everything will go a lot smoother. Peter is also available for presentations as well. And if you've heard him sing or if you heard him on the History Podcast, we're coming up with our first full-length broadcast next week. You'll want him there. And we've been doing it for over 30 years now, presentations and talks and exhibits. So I think it might be time we get back on the road. We've got both historical and genealogical presentations and consultations available for crowds of any size. And we're also putting together a little historical sing-along, so you add that to our historical tours, and my gosh, what more could you want? Number 4, I've recently gotten several inquiries about sponsoring our podcast and or our webpage. We have 6 podcast feeds now, and I only do 1 or 2 at a time, so each of them has to take their turn. But we haven't thought of that for a while now. We've been so busy doing the real thing, getting around to the marketing. I've never typed a letter. I'm telling you. But it seems we're being discovered right now after several years. So, yes, we are open to sponsors for our 6 podcast series and the webpage, as long as we can keep the paperwork to a minimum. That would give us time to do even more books, podcasts, and presentations. Contact me now for the 2010 possibilities. Number 5, we have the very first sessions, the chapters recorded for our first season of Irish Hedgerow history. And these oral presentations are going to span, you know what, we're going to try to do 100 of them for starters. And they're supposed to span 2,000 years of Irish history in those 100 sessions. And we've already covered some of the Vikings and Brian Boru and a little bit of St. Patrick, the Bardic School, the Hedge Schools, politics, Eamon de Valera, the famine and immigration. So it's going to be really interesting, and stay tuned for that. And be sure to go to iTunes or to my webpage and get subscribed to that, because they're coming up. We've got our 2 introductory little talks on there, but the first real session is coming up this week. It should go on today, as a matter of fact. Now, that's going to include, if you listen to what we've got up already, it includes a brief introduction about Peter Riley Adams and myself. And we go way back to the 1980s, when we were attending Rockhurst University. We began lecturing and presenting Irish history topics way back then. And just be sure to subscribe on iTunes and give us a listen. See what you think. We're always open to criticism, too, so let us know. Now it's time we move on to the Book of the Month. Well, the book of the month is going to be a genealogical history of the Milesian families of Ireland. Now, here, I'm going to take this from the introduction to the book I wrote several years ago. I'll have the whole introduction on the blog if you want to read it. But the genealogical history of the Milesian families of Ireland is one of the few works of its kind that was produced in the 19th century. And I don't think there's any other book I've seen that brought forth more information in such a compact format and easily understood, even if sometimes it might be a guess or two there instead of raw fact. You're going to see the massive works of people like John O'Hart, the landed gentry of Ireland, and they're of the same era, but they don't allow the same overview. The later ones, like O'Hart's work, are bulky and big, and they're really large books, and you have to sit down and read for quite a while. And they've got some errors in them, too, so nobody's perfect. But this book, The Milesian Families, it's one of the early modern works. Like the work of the Reverend Patrick Wolfe really brought us into the modern age with his Irish names and surnames. But that didn't come until 40 years after Milesian Families came out. And MacLysott came out even decades after that. So there's a great debt that we owe to these early works on genealogy, and sometimes the sources they had back then we don't have today, so they might be more right than we thought. And it doubtlessly woke up many an Irishman to the exploration of their family history and legend back there in the 1800s, and that's continued on with each and every one of us today. So it also provides us a way to fight over something and say, hey, wait a minute, that's wrong or that's right, and finally settle the matter. And the good and bad of it is that book is a groundbreaking work that was researched 120 some years ago. And yes, it will have a need for review and updates, as all books do. But the knowledge and the use of the Irish language has even changed, so some of those translations might have changed too. But back then, that might have been the best they had. And the meanings and the spelling groupings attributed to many of the Irish names are correct, and most of them are correct. And in the light of current knowledge and translation skills, we might be able to refine them even a little bit more. And the spelling used for the Old Irish here are notably different from what you'll read most often today. But we have to remember, when looking at these old books with the genealogy notes and family history, common sense has to prevail. If a name is listed in that book as arriving in 1620, That doesn't mean it only arrived in Ireland in 1620. That means they know of at least one family that came in 1620, and they might have come before, they might have come after, but that's at least a starting point to say, yes, the family did come, and it was here at least by that date. And, families have arrived continuously after that Norman invasion, and of course the Viking families arrived too before that, but from the time of Strongbow right down to the present day. And if they're listed in a book with a date, it likely means that the author had a reason to give that date for the family and a piece of information to back it up. Now, we'd like to see the documentation on every single family we see listed in a book. Sometimes it's not there. We've got to do a little more digging ourselves. And then you also have to be able to separate ancient legend and the old pedigrees that stretch far beyond the imagination all the way back to Noah and Moses. And then you have to start thinking, well, how would they know this? They had to fill in some dotted lines, I think. And the laid down sequence in this book, it's in short order, and it traces everybody back, way back, and judgment is required. The early dates are probably correct, and you get back before the Norman invasion, and you might be in trouble. But the closer we come to our era, the 19th century, the 20th century, the more sure the facts are going to be, because the people were living then that wrote that book. But make no mistake about it, it's a noteworthy and valuable work, and if for nothing else, to double-check our current theories. And I hope this book will bring you an expanded understanding of your family heritage. And, of course, the Milesians were a wave of the Celts that came over under the lead of Miled or Milesius or Mil. And the story was told in the old book that was translated by Michael Cleary, the Book of Invasions. And he was also the fellow that translated the Annals of Ireland by the Four Masters. And it tells of a Spanish soldier that came over and established a line of people that became what we call Irish today. And that book was taken over by O'Donnell after the Battle of Kinsale in Ireland. He took it over to the Spanish king and said, look, our oldest book says that the Spaniards came and settled our race, so we want you to come help fight against the English today. Will you help us? Well, it didn't work. He ended up dying in Spain within a year, so it was a good try, though, and it just shows you these old books, there's some truth to them, and DNA is going to answer a lot of our questions eventually. Now, you might be curious what's in a book like this, and you might think, well, I don't want anything to do with it, but you can always go to your library and get a copy on loan. It talks about the ancient laws and the pedigrees and the adventures of Milesius and the Milesians and how they conquered Ireland. This is part of the legend. And the divisions of the country after they conquered it. And that was done for a reason. And the regulations of the ancient Milesians and the ancient names they used for Ireland. And that checks out real well. And the first monarch of the whole island and the most noted kings in pagan Ireland. And a lot of the old families and legends are given in there. And the counties, of course, are enumerated. And it also gives the clans and septs in Ireland. The Clan of Roy, the High Neil, the High Brune, the High Minnie, the High Fiacra. And there's the Desi and the Clan of Falja and Canabros Brack. Mottos of the Irish families, titles of families, a list of families, and the worthies of whose name they adopted, and names and locations of other families in Ireland that weren't Milesian, that had settled in Ireland. There's a little section on that too, and you can go through there and see a lot of the dates and the names that are given. But that'll do it for the book today. I just want to tell you a little bit about that one. I did that several years ago, and it was one of the few really genealogical works that you find in the 19th century. And I'd like to remind you now that we've still got that blog reader and the podcast, so there's two ways you can hear this podcast. You can click on the blog reader, and the computer voices are getting better every year, or you can listen to this podcast that I'm talking about right now. And some of my words are different from what's in the blog, so you can tell the difference. And coming up, we're going to talk about Miss Ireland. She keeps her job, her regular old workaday job, and she gets laughed at. What do you think about that? Well, we'll find out about that soon enough. But now you know what time it is. It's time to raise our eyes skywards, give thanks, and ask for help. Here are today's Magnificent Seven. Number 1, Helen Farina of El Paso, Texas. Your County Clare and County Down genealogy and family history notes has shipped. Sarah Aspel of Redondo Beach, California. Your Book of Irish Families Great and Small has shipped. Dennis Bonner of Levittown, Pennsylvania. Your Families of County Donegal is on the way. Russell McDonough of Little Rock, Arkansas. Your County Sligo genealogy book has shipped. Donna Donaldson of Cheshire in the UK. Your Kings and Queens County genealogy has shipped. Mark Walmsley of Bradenton, Florida. Your Families of County Cork, Ireland has shipped. And 7, welcome new member Jane DeFries of Leavenworth, Kansas. Glad to have you here, Jane. Appreciate your support. And once again, I've got to say thank you to each and every member and each and every person that gets one of our books. I sure do appreciate it. Now it's time we move on to the Irish family name of the day. The Irish family name of the day is O'Guin. You heard that right. That's pronounced with a G, Guin, O'Guin, G-U-I-N. And the first thing you might think is, well, that could be Quin, Q-U-I-N. And that's quite right. And we're doing this family name in honor of Randy O'Guin of Alexandria, Virginia. And related spellings of the name, you're going to have to look on the blog, but there's O'Quin and MacGuin and Gwinny and Guiney and Guinan and Gunning. So many of them can be shortened to Gwyn, and if you have an O before the name, well, you just don't know. It's hard to figure out. Now, that's in several variant spelling groups, 773, 774, 1369, and 3 or 4 others, so that's taken from the Master Guide to the Various Spellings of Irish Family Names. Link to that is on the blog. Now, if we take a look at that name, the first thing we say, well, it can have several different origins, but if we assume that the O before the name is correct, the most numerous name of O'Quin could be the original spelling group from which O'Guin was taken. There are several areas where that name is common, including Tyrone, Clare, and Roscommon. All you have to do is look at O'Quin history. This is taken from the Book of Irish Families, Great and Small. That's the master volume to the 34-book set. And looking at our records, we've got the name of Guin, G-U-I-N, in the families of County Cork, Ireland, and several longer spellings of the name that could have been shortened to Gwyn. And one might consider the name of McGinnis, except it's got the Mac before the name instead of O, so we're going to use that to eliminate it right now. Now, if we take a look in our that Families of County Cork book, and we look for Gwyn, what do we find it as? Well, we see him saying that that's one of the Huguenot settlers' name at Youghal, County Cork, and it's generally given as settling there immediately after the accession of William the Orange. And that corporation was entirely Protestant, and it welcomed them with open arms. So those Huguenots appeared to have often been military men, so they might have been retiring from the battles there. That might have been the Battle of, I don't know what it would have been. William of Orange, so that would have been early, mid-century there, a little bit late, mid to late 17th century. Might have been at the Battle of the Boyne. Well, that's interesting. So here's two very different possibilities. One is a Protestant name, they say, that came over with the Huguenot settlers, and the other is an old Irish family of O'Quin. that makes it sort of interesting to do that research, and it gives you another excuse to have that DNA test made as well. Now, if we take a real quick look, there's no coat of arms for the family spelled with a G at the beginning, Guin or O'Guin, but there is, of course, as O'Quin, so that's illustrated fully in the Irish Book of Arms. Hey, coming up later this episode, we've got a link to no wigs on Irish dancers. Isn't that interesting? Something I think I support. Let's take a quick look at Gwyn or O'Gwyn or Guinea in the Free Master Index search of Irish names, and we find the names several times. We find Gwyn, like I said, in the families of County Cork, and D. Guinness or D. Gwynnis in families of County Cork, and Guinee in Irish names and surnames by Wolfe. And gosh, we've got another reference with an I on it to families of County Cork, and O'Gwynedy, which sounds more like O'Kennedy in the families of County Kerry, but that starts with the G, and a couple other references in Irish names and surnames too, and the spellings are too difficult to attempt at this moment, but they're on the blog and listed along with the sources. Well, now it's time we came to the website of the week. Well, we've got several websites this week. Number one, I call it Look, No Wigs. Now, that's what I call Irish dancing. Pretty darn good. I owe that to, gosh, I think I saw that on Twitter, and now I can't remember who I stole it from. It's either that or I got it off of all those many links that people send in to me. I must get 100 links a week of people sending articles in, so if you see something interesting, just go ahead and email that to me or drop me a line on the webpage. I'll get it on the news here so everybody can see it. Number two, the State Library of South Australia is now on YouTube, and that's real interesting to everybody in Australia or some folks in other countries that have relatives who split. Some of them came to the U.S., some of them went to Australia. I think there was one friend I had, I think it was the Reagans. One or two of the brothers stayed in the U.S., and the older brother went to Australia after dropping them off in the U.S. So, you know, there were some people that covered a lot of ground, and that just goes to show you not everybody in Australia was a convict now, you know. Number three, they just found 4,500 pigs with the swine flu in Northern Ireland, and the owner of those pigs says that the loss of their appetite was the very first clue. He knew they were sick when they weren't mucking around and all that stuff and eating it, so I guess that's what we should watch out for in ourselves. But it's interesting because I heard that pigs were not the cause of swine flu, and they weren't supposed to call it swine flu anymore. And here we see 4,500 pigs have the swine flu in Northern Ireland. Link is on the blog. Number four, Family History Library adds records of Longford, Ireland. Well, that's right. I've got a link on the blog, and those are some resources from 1851 to 1921 for Longford. And it just reminds us that Family History Library is always up and adding records all the time. About any time you can check on there, and there'll be some new records going in. That brings us to the very end of the day, everybody's favorite, Curious News and Notes. Number one, Kevin Myers just wanted an old-fashioned Irish pub lunch. Maybe some home soup and a sandwich with some coffee. But you know what? It seems they don't really do sandwiches anymore. I guess you have to ask for a panini, and then you have to choose from 10 kinds of coffee and 4 kinds of bread. And he says, is this still Ireland? You can read all about his experience on the blog. That was from the independent.ie. Number two, we've hit a very new low for budget cuts in schools in Ireland. Principal Catherine O'Neill said that they had to reduce spending due to government education grants, so they sent home a note with students asking them to bring in their own toilet paper to save money. Now, I wonder, would this be like the old custom in the hedge schools where students had to bring a brick or two in of peat to heat the schoolroom in the winter. Except now they're bringing in their own toilet paper. That seems like there might be what you call a political stunt, I would think. But I wasn't there, so I couldn't say. Number 3. I've noted the Viking wall that appears in the shopping center mall off the square in Galway City before. Now here I run into an article on the Viking wall from 12th century in Dublin in the civic offices on Wood Quay, which is now on display. That was from the Herald.ie. Boy, those Viking walls makes you think of the Battle of Clontarf, doesn't it? And Brian, and he was fighting with Vikings and against Vikings on that day. And, oh gosh, his ex-wife, that would be Grumla. And she was also tied into the Vikings, and she was written about in the sagas about that battle on both sides. The Viking wrote about her, and the Irish wrote about her, and they actually blamed her for the whole thing. Can you imagine that? Well, they went on and did the fighting, that's for sure. We just did a podcast on that. That's why I remembered it. And number 4, a pint at a pub in Ireland now carries an excise tax 9 times higher than the average in the European Union. Can anybody say home brew? That's a pitiful thing. It's such a good draw for tourists and such a well-known thing to have a pint in Ireland, to tax it 9 times more than anywhere else. Doesn't seem wise. Number 5, Ireland is one of the top 20 most admired countries around the world. China and the U.S. were big winners in this little contest or vote compared to last year. And I've got some of the other rankings there on the webpage, and you can find more on our link to the independent.ie. Now, the new Miss Ireland is Laura Patterson, and a lot of fools have made fun of her for having a job at Tesco, which is a grocery store in Northern Ireland. She kept her simple job as a checkout girl after winning the Miss Ireland award. Now, that sounds quite sound to me, and I'd give her my vote, and those people making fun of her, I think they're on the wrong road. Got that story off of irishcentral.com, link on the blog. Oh, that does it for the day. I've got to get back to this new podcast, too, and plus we've got some other things in the works. I don't have enough time these days, but if you know anybody that might want to sponsor any of these podcasts or a series or a webpage, pass it on before I forget about it. But remember to send your comments by clicking the contact link on our webpage at irishroots.com, or send by mail to our American address, the Irish Roots Cafe, Box 7575, Kansas City, Missouri 64116. Leave your message or report on things in your part of the world when you call my phone recorder at 816-256-3360. Skype me at Irish Roots Cafe. Reach me on MySpace and Facebook at Irish Roots Cafe, and it's Twitter too. You can get me on there, and I'm on Irish Central. I've got a blog on there. I just talked about I never carried the sod in my last blog there, so you might want to look at that. And remember, members foot the bill, so they get first priority, but we're open to all. And by the way, a big thank you to all of our members, and that includes Australia too. And away.